Everyone knows the Union Pacific Big Boy, 4,414 tons of American muscle, the largest steam locomotive ever built, retired in 1959 after barely 2 decades of service. Museums preserve them. Historians worship them. One still runs today, a rolling monument to engineering ambition. But deep in the archives of European rail history lies a machine that shatters the big boy narrative. A German giant that not only matched its power, not only survived the apocalypse of World War II, but kept working, kept hauling freight, kept climbing mountains, kept proving its worth, until 1988, 30 years after the big boy's retirement. 3 full decades of additional service, while America's icon sat silent in museums. How did a locomotive designed in the chaos of Nazi Germany outlast the pride of American engineering? And why does almost nobody know its name? The locomotive was the Deutsche Reichsbahn Class 44. Not a household name, not celebrated in coffee table books, but the numbers don't lie. Over 6,000 units built, service life spanning from 1926 to 1988, 62 years of continuous operation. Compare that to Big Boy's 21 years of active duty. The contrast isn't just dramatic, it's devastating to the legend. To understand how this happened, you need to go back to 1925. Germany's rail network was drowning in freight traffic. The Versailles Treaty had stripped away territories, but coal, steel, and industrial goods still needed moving across mountainous terrain. The existing fleet couldn't handle the load. Engineers at the Prussian Railway Design Bureau faced a problem. Build a locomotive powerful enough to haul heavy freight up brutal grades, efficient enough to operate economically, and simple enough that war-ravaged Germany could actually manufacture it in quantity. They couldn't afford American-style gigantism. No resources for exotic alloys or cutting-edge designs. What they needed was brutal effectiveness wrapped in industrial pragmatism. The result was the Class 44, a 3-cylinder 2-to-10-0 configuration with a rigid wheelbase designed for slow, grinding power. Boiler pressure of 214 psi. Tractive effort of over 60,000 pounds. Not quite Big Boy's 135,000 pounds, true. But the comparison misleads. Big Boy was built for Wyoming's gentle grades and unlimited coal supplies. The Class 44 was engineered for the Ruhr Valley's industrial heartland and the steep climbs of central Germany, where every pound of coal mattered. Where Big Boy prioritized raw power, Class 44 prioritized endurance and fuel efficiency. Its 3-cylinder compound design extracted maximum energy from steam, recycling exhaust through low-pressure cylinders before releasing it. American locomotives often sacrificed efficiency for simplicity. German engineers took the harder path, complexity that paid dividends over decades. The first Class 44s entered service in 1926. By 1927, production had scaled across multiple manufacturers. These weren't prestige machines, they were workhorses, assigned to freight routes that broke lesser locomotives. Ore trains from the Ruhr, coal drags through Thuringia, manifest freight across the North German plain. Day after day, year after year, through snow and heat, the Class 44s ground forward. Then came 1939. War. The Nazi regime militarized everything, including locomotive production. The Class 44 became the backbone of military logistics. Ammunition trains, troop movements, supply lines stretching from France to the Eastern Front. Engineers stripped away non-essentials, simplified construction, used substitute materials. The wartime variants, Class 44 Übergangs Kriegslokomotive, sacrificed finish for speed of production, riveted instead of welded, cheaper metals, rougher tolerances. But here's the paradox, that wartime austerity made them more maintainable, not less. A locomotive built with basic materials and simple techniques could be repaired by any competent machinist with standard tools. No specialized parts, no proprietary systems. When components wore out, you made new ones, or scavenged from damaged units. The Class 44 became nearly indestructible through sheer mechanical honesty. Meanwhile, Big Boy's complexity, its articulated frame, its precise tolerances, its specialized components, demanded factory-level maintenance. Union Pacific had the resources for that during the 1940s and 1950s. But when diesels arrived and steam's economics collapsed, that complexity became a death sentence. The end of World War II should have killed the Class 44. Germany lay in ruins. Its rail network was shattered. Allied bombing had destroyed workshops, bridges, stations. Thousands of locomotives sat abandoned, damaged, or captured. The Class 44 fleet was scattered across a divided nation, some in the Soviet-controlled East, others in the Western zones. This is where the story becomes remarkable. Both German states, East and West, rebuilt their railways around surviving steam locomotives. They had no choice. Diesel technology was expensive. Rebuilding took time. The economy demanded functioning rail transport immediately. Engineers surveyed the wreckage and found hundreds of Class 44s that could be restored. Damaged boilers were patched, worn cylinders were rebored, frames were straightened. By 1947, Class 44s were hauling freight again. In West Germany, they worked alongside more modern designs, gradually phased out as diesels arrived. But in East Germany, the DDR, the Class 44 became essential. The DDR inherited the industrial Ruhr's less glamorous cousin. Saxony's coal mines, Thuringia's factories, the heavy industry that fed the Soviet sphere. The Class 44's power and reliability made it irreplaceable. East German engineers didn't just maintain them, they improved them. In the 1960s, Deutsche Reichsbahn workshops retrofitted many units with improved boilers, better bearings, updated lubrication systems. They added Heinel feedwater heaters for efficiency. Giesel ejectors improved draft. These weren't museum pieces. They were actively evolving machines, adapted for continued relevance. By 1959, when Union Pacific retired Big Boy 4014 after a farewell run, over 1,000 Class 44s were still in daily service across East Germany. Not as tourist attractions, as working freight locomotives hauling the DDR's industrial output. The 1960s and 1970s tested their endurance. Diesel locomotives slowly infiltrated even the DDR's conservative rail network, but steam didn't vanish. The DDR couldn't afford rapid replacement. Soviet diesel designs were often unreliable. Parts were scarce. Maintenance facilities needed retooling. So the Class 44s kept working. They hauled coal from strip mines to power plants. They moved chemical products from Luna. They dragged ore trains through the Harz Mountains. Crews who worked them developed deep respect. These weren't glamorous assignments. Steam locomotive duty was dirty, physically demanding, often assigned to less senior engineers. But the Class 44 earned loyalty through dependability. Firemen praised their steady steam production. Engineers appreciated their pulling power on grades. Maintenance staff valued their straightforward design. When a Class 44 broke down, you could usually fix it on site with basic tools. Compare that to Big Boy's retirement. Union Pacific had tried to preserve them through the late 1950s, but economics were brutal. A single big boy required a dedicated support crew, specialized maintenance, enormous coal and water consumption. When the railroad calculated cost per ton-mile, the diesels crushed steam's economics. Union Pacific's management made the rational choice: scrap or donate the big boys, invest in diesel-electric technology, move forward. The last revenue service for a big boy came in July 1959. Number 4014 made a final run from Cheyenne to Laramie and back. Then silence. The age of steam in America ended not with a bang, but with a quiet parking in storage yards, followed by slow dispersal to museums. But in East Germany through the 1970s, Class 44s remained active. Not in huge numbers. The fleet had shrunk to a few hundred by 1975, but they worked real jobs. The DDR's railways operated under different logic. Western efficiency metrics didn't apply. Jobs mattered more than pure economics. Centrally planned quotas cared about deliveries, not cost optimization. And frankly, the Class 44s still did the work. The 1980s brought the endgame. Even the DDR couldn't justify steam forever. New Soviet diesels became more reliable. Part supplies improved. Infrastructure modernized. Railway management began systematic steam retirement. But it was gradual, almost reluctant. As each section of the network converted to diesel, the remaining steam locomotives concentrated on fewer routes. The final strongholds were heavy freight lines in industrial regions. Schwarze Pumpe power plant, chemical works around Bitterfeld, coal trains from open-pit mines. The work that had defined the Class 44 from its first day in 1926, hauling heavy loads up difficult grades, doing the dirty essential work that kept an economy running. The very last Class 44 in revenue service retired in 1988. Not with ceremony or fanfare. The DDR wasn't given to nostalgia about technology. Workers simply cleaned out the cab, drained the boiler, and moved the locomotive to storage. 62 years after the first one entered service, the Class 44's working life finally ended. Think about what that means. The locomotive that began hauling freight under the Weimar Republic survived the Nazi regime, survived World War II's devastation, survived Germany's partition, survived the Cold War, and finally retired the year before the Berlin Wall fell. It outlasted governments, ideologies, economic systems. It outlasted its American contemporary by 3 decades. Why? Why did a German freight locomotive from the 1920s work longer than America's mightiest steam machine? The answer isn't simple superiority. Big Boy was objectively more powerful. American railroads had better infrastructure, more resources, higher maintenance standards. Union Pacific could have kept Big Boys running if economics justified it. They chose not to, because diesels made more financial sense in America's operating environment. But that's the point. The Class 44 survived precisely because it fit a different environment. East Germany couldn't afford rapid modernization. The DDR's centrally planned economy moved slowly, valued established technology, maintained large repair workforces, and operated under metrics that didn't purely prioritize efficiency. The Class 44 thrived in that system because it was repairable, adaptable, and fundamentally sound. Its longevity reveals something historians often miss. Technological superiority isn't absolute. It's contextual. Big Boy represented the peak of American steam design, maximizing power within a system that could support massive, complex machines. The Class 44 represented a different philosophy: moderate power, high reliability, long-term maintainability. Neither approach was wrong. They optimized for different futures. In the end, history remembers what endures in the public imagination, not necessarily what endures longest. Big Boy became a legend because it embodied American industrial ambition at its zenith. Huge, powerful, audacious. Preservationists saved examples. Union Pacific restored 4014 to operation. Photographers and enthusiasts created a mythology around it. The Class 44 became a footnote because it embodied something less glamorous: steady competence, unglamorous service, work without glory. When the DDR collapsed, no one thought to celebrate the industrial locomotives that had hauled its economy for decades. Most were scrapped. A handful went to museums. Their story remained obscure, locked in German railway archives, and the memories of aging engineers who'd fired them through long winter nights. But the record doesn't lie. 62 years of service versus 21. 6,000 units built versus 25. Continuous operation until 1988 versus retirement in 1959. By any objective measure of longevity and sustained usefulness, the German giant outlasted the American legend by an entire generation. So next time someone claims Big Boy as the ultimate steam locomotive, remember the Class 44. Remember that greatness isn't always about size or power. Sometimes it's about showing up, day after day, year after year, decade after decade, doing the work that needs doing without drama or recognition. Sometimes the locomotive that lasts longest is the one designed not for glory, but for endurance. The German giant outlasted Big Boy by 30 years, not because it was bigger, not because it was more famous, but because it was built to work, maintained by people who needed it, and operated in a system that valued longevity over novelty. In the end, that might be the truest measure of engineering success, not the records you break on opening day, but how long you remain useful when the spotlight moves on and the real work continues.